The agri-world of Helion 4 began like any other quiet dawn, its golden fields waving gently under early sunlight as workers prepared for another long, uneventful day. But something in the air tasted wrong, too still, too cold, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Birds stopped mid-flight and crashed. Animals wailed and ran in circles before dying where they stood, and priests in distant shrines felt their candles extinguish without reason. Then the first tremor hit, deep, rumbling, unnatural, shaking the soil as if an unseen monster clawed at the planet's heart from beneath. People froze, listening to the earth groan like a dying titan struggling to breathe. Without warning, the sky ruptured. A colossal green fracture tore across the heavens, vomiting warp light that bent clouds like twisted metal. The sun drowned behind a veil of emerald storms as massive orc rocks punched through the atmosphere, burning like fallen gods. Their impacts shattered continents, turning cities into smoking craters and hurling millions into oblivion before they even understood what was happening. Dust blotted out the sky, screams vanished under the roar of meteoric fire, and the air thickened with ash and the iron stink of blood. Survivors staggered from the debris only to see the dead twitch, rise, and collapse again as warp energy violated every law of existence. The first orcs spilled out of the burning wreckage, silhouettes of monstrous muscle and jagged metal framed by walls of fire. Their laughter, raw, guttural, inhuman, echoed across the landscape like a curse. They tore apart survivors with joyful brutality, smashing bones, ripping limbs, painting the fields red. Entire houses burned in seconds, families vanished in clouds of dust and gore, and the wind carried the scent of death so thick it clung to the skin like oil. But beneath the chaos, something heavier, deeper, more terrifying trembled toward them. Even the orcs paused, sensing a presence beyond their savage understanding. The flames parted, and a titan-shaped shadow stepped through. Whatever monster Helion IV had feared, this was worse. Much worse. Thanos emerged from the inferno like a living catastrophe. His armor, a grotesque fusion of arc plates and shattered imperial steel, glowed with the heat of battle. Sparks danced across his massive frame as fires clung to him like terrified spirits. A crude but terrifying gauntlet, stitched from orc tech, imperial relics, and warp-infused metal, hummed with unstable green power. His eyes burned with cold purpose, not rage, not hunger, purpose. The orcs around him froze, awestruck by a being whose presence eclipsed even their greatest war bosses. They felt instinctively that this creature was no leader. He was an executioner. Thanos raised the WAAAGH gauntlet. The air cracked. Orcish psychic energy surged outward like a tidal wave, electrifying the horde with impossible strength. Muscles bulged, bones thickened, voices grew deep and monstrous. The WAAAGH roared to life, louder, fiercer, more focused than any orc alive had ever experienced. They felt united, not by rage, but by the will of something far more calculating. Reality twisted at Thanos' feet, warping soil into spirals, bending metal into screaming shapes. Even the sky dimmed beneath the swelling vortex of psychic power. He inhaled destruction as if it was oxygen. Then he spoke one word that shattered the air. WAAAGH! The horde exploded into pure madness. Orks charged with unstoppable ferocity, smashing through Imperial farming towns like hammer blows against glass. Thanos walked calmly behind them, each step sinking deep into scorched earth. Tanks fired at him. He caught the shells mid-air. Bastions targeted him. He ripped their towers down with a lazy pull. His strength grew with every orc cheer, every scream, every death. The orcs began chanting his name in their guttural tongue. "The Mad Titan Boss!" He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He only stared at the distant horizon where the Imperium lay waiting, unaware of the storm now marching toward them. Thanos lifted his gauntlet and pointed toward the stars. The orcs roared. The galaxy began to shake. On Terra, alarms shrieked across the palace walls like tortured metal. Astropaths collapsed screaming, their minds breaking under visions of green fire swallowing entire sectors. Reports poured in. 5 worlds gone in an hour. A dozen more silent. Entire fleets ripped apart by a single united WAAAGH. High Lords stood frozen in disbelief as hollow screens turned red one by one, marking the expanding path of annihilation. Officers whispered forbidden comparisons. This destruction mirrored the opening days of the Horus heresy. Something was moving through the stars with impossible speed, and every system it touched became a grave. In command bunkers across Segmentum Solar, battle plans dissolved into chaos. Imperial Guard regiments scrambled to reinforce doomed worlds. Chapters prepared extermination protocols, and tech priests locked themselves in vaults, trying to understand how an Ork WAAAGH could grow this fast. Then a transmission arrived, grainy, distorted, horrifying. Thanos, standing atop a mountain of space marine corpses, tearing the last one in half with effortless cruelty. Behind him, millions of orcs marched under a single banner, their glyphs carved with symbols of death and conquest. Commanders felt their confidence rot into dread. The realization struck the Imperium like an orbital bombardment. This was not a WAAAGH. It was an extermination crusade, guided by a mind far colder than orcs ever possessed. Worlds weren't being conquered. They were being erased. Entire populations vanished in minutes. Psychic warnings grew louder, darker, more desperate. Priests begged for divine intervention. Soldiers prepared their final rites, and civilians prayed for a death quick enough to spare them what the visions described. The Imperium had seen horrors before, but nothing like this. Nothing led by Thanos. And as they struggled to brace for impossible war, the Mad Titan and his unstoppable horde were already moving toward their next victim. The galaxy burned like a dying beast. Forge worlds were the first to fall. Their titanic manufactorums turned into molten skeletons as orc rocks punched through their steel continents. Great Titan engines screamed as they were torn apart mid-stride, their molten cores spilling across the landscape like the blood of slain gods. Shrine worlds suffered next. Holy icons shattered, saints' statues toppled, and sacred libraries consumed by green flame. Pilgrims fled through corridors, only to be gunned down or trampled by stampeding mobs of green-skin monsters. Orc laughter echoed through places once filled with hymns, turning faith into ash. Space Marine chapters attempted to counterattack, but were shredded like parchment under a chain axe. Entire companies vanished beneath avalanches of orc flesh, each death feeding the growing psychic storm that clung to Thanos' advance. Even mighty chapter masters were buried under mountains of greenskins, their armor bent and crushed by sheer numbers. Vox transmissions carried only screams and static, followed by dead silence. Chapter keeps were reduced to burning ruins, their banners trampled into mud. Across the stars a terrible truth spread. The Emperor's angels of death were dying faster than they could be deployed. Among the ruins of one such devastated world trudged a lone survivor squad, 4 broken figures from the 91st Vraxian Regiment. A young guardsman covered in his brother's dried blood, a sergeant whose hands wouldn't stop shaking, a tech priest with half his augmentations torn out, and a lone space marine limping with a shattered pauldron. They spoke little. Their eyes were hollow, carrying memories of a regiment that no longer existed. They moved through a wasteland littered with twisted bodies and burning tanks, each step weighed by grief and survivor's guilt. Every shadow felt like an ambush. Every breath tasted like the last one they might ever take. Behind them, the sky burned green again. Another world was about to fall. On the smoldering plains of Charon Reach, the Imperium finally witnessed Thanos' true nature. He stood at the center of the battlefield, surrounded by millions of ecstatic orcs, their psychic energy raw, chaotic, limitless, pouring into him like a roaring river. The WAAAGH was not just a force now. It had become a weapon bending to his will. Warp lightning crawled across his armor, thickening his muscles and darkening his skin with every cheer, every kill, every roar of belief from the greenskin horde. Thanos exhaled slowly, and the ground cracked beneath him as though the world itself bowed under his weight. A Lehman Russ battle tank fired at him from near point-blank range. Thanos caught the shell, crushed it in one hand, and hurled the molten fragments back with enough force to punch through 6 tanks lined behind it. His punches shattered ceramite like fragile bones. A single swing of his gauntlet split the ground open and sent shockwaves tearing across the battlefield, toppling bastions and ripping entire trenches apart. When he roared, the air vibrated violently, shattering visors, cracking armor, and rupturing lungs. Even space marines staggered under the tremor, their hearts skipping in terror. Worst of all was the effect he had on morale. The mere sight of him made veteran soldiers freeze, made psychers faint, made commanders lose their voices. Men who had survived decades of war found themselves trembling uncontrollably. Some fled, others begged the Emperor for mercy. Thanos did not need to kill them. His presence alone broke them. Orks, however, swelled with impossible strength, chanting his name until the air shook. "Da Mad Titan Boss! Da Mad Titan Boss!" And with every chant, Thanos grew stronger, taller, darker. He was becoming a living engine of cosmic annihilation. Even the bravest warriors realized a terrifying truth. Thanos could not be slowed, let alone stopped. The battlefield had become a nightmare carved into reality. Space Marines, genetic demigods, were torn limb from limb by mobs of orcs swollen with WAAAGH energy. The greenskins ripped open power armor like children tearing paper, dragging out organs and trophies while roaring with maddened joy. A squad of Terminators attempted to form a defensive wall, but a wave of psychic force smashed them flat, cracking their armor and pulping their bodies within. Blood ran in rivers through the trenches, mixing with mud, oil, and shattered ceramite. The sky flickered like a dying star, poisoned by warp storms. Civilians were trampled in the chaos, swallowed beneath stampeding greenskins or immolated by falling debris. Mothers clutched their children as orcs stormed through hab blocks, smashing through walls and floors with brutal laughter. Entire lines of planetary defense forces vanished in seconds as a wall of orcs surged through them, their bodies swallowed by a rolling tsunami of muscle, steel, and psychic insanity. Explosions tore men apart before their screams even reached the air. The sheer weight of violence crushed hope like an insect. Then came the psychic storms, vast, swirling tempests of green energy unleashed by Thanos' growing power. The storms devoured entire fortifications, erasing trenches, tanks, and soldiers in blinding bursts of corrupted light. Psykers who tried to push back were overwhelmed instantly, their minds burned out, their bodies twisted into screaming, formless shapes. Command centers fried, artillery silos detonated, and entire continents fell silent. The Imperium's strongest defenders were broken, their tactics shattered, their courage drained. Everywhere, the same message echoed. They could not stop him. And as the smoke cleared, the silhouette of Thanos still stood, untouched, unchallenged, and hungering for his next kill. The High Lord's chamber burned with flickering hololithic light, each projection crackling like a dying star. The air throbbed with tension, thick enough to taste like iron and dust. Voices slammed against the marble walls. Shouts, accusations, prayers, desperate bargains. No two lords agreed. Some demanded exterminatus on entire sectors. Others pleaded for consolidation. A few whispered treason behind veils of protocol. The Golden Throne's distant hum felt weaker than ever, as if even the Emperor himself sensed the unraveling. No unity remained, only fear, suspicion, and the scent of a dying empire. The Adeptus Astartes were no better. Chapters once bound by honor now spat in each other's faces. The Minotaurs claimed authority over 3 sectors, executing commanders who resisted. The Dark Angels vanished entirely, refusing all calls. The Space Wolves flatly defied High Lord orders, swearing to defend only the worlds they deemed righteous. Astropaths screamed as conflicting command sigils tore their minds open. Across the galaxy, fleets drifted without direction. Armies stalled, and entire crusades collapsed into violence as allies became enemies in seconds. Worlds trembled beneath the weight of this discord. Some governors declared independence, convinced Terra was dead. Others executed billions in blind obedience to contradictory messages. Pilgrims rioted, believing the Emperor's silence signaled the final night. Battle Sisters purged apostates, while Mechanicus priests fought over which data stream carried the true order from Terra. Millions died, not from orcs, but from human panic devouring itself. The Imperium, stretched thin for millennia, finally felt the hairline cracks rupture into gaping, bleeding wounds. The camera cuts to the survivor squad trudging through the ruins of a dead city, ash swirling like phantom snow. The young guardsman moves with hollow eyes, clutching his brother's broken dog tags as if they were a lifeline, preventing him from falling into madness. Every footstep echoes with the memory of screams he couldn't silence, blood he couldn't stop, and a brother he couldn't save. His grief isn't loud, it simmers, slow and poisonous, carving trenches into his young face until he looks decades older. Beside him walks the veteran sergeant, armor scratched, voice gravel-thin, hands trembling when they think no one is watching. PTSD clings to him like another layer of armor. He flinches at distant booms, snaps at shadows, and mutters battlefield coordinates under his breath. He's survived too many campaigns, watched too many soldiers die, and now fears sleep more than death. Yet he keeps moving, driven not by hope, but by a duty that feels like a curse tattooed onto his soul. The wounded tech priest limps behind them, mechanical limbs sparking with exposed wires. He chants scraps of Binharic prayers, yet each syllable trembles with doubt. For the first time in his existence, the Omnissiah feels silent. His logic matrices glitch with forbidden thoughts. What if the machine god is not watching? What if all this suffering is meaningless? His augmetics are failing, his faith decaying, and his human heart, long buried beneath metal, bleeds with uncertainty. The last of their group towers above them. A lone surviving space marine, armor cracked, pauldron scorched, chapter insignia half melted. His entire chapter, brothers he fought beside for centuries, lies dead across a dozen war fronts. He speaks rarely, voice a cold thunder. But his silence says more. A warrior built for war, now hollowed by the one thing even a space marine cannot endure, absolute loneliness. He fights not for glory, but because stopping means admitting he is the last echo of a dead legacy. As the survivor squad marches, the narrative shifts to the void. The Titan boss's armada burns through the final sectors like a storm of iron and fire. Millions of Ork ships, ramshackle, brutal, and impossibly vast, crash through Imperial defense lines. Planetary shields crack like glass. Void stations melt under orbital bombardment. Every hour, another star system falls. Vox reports dissolve into static or screams. The segmentum solar grows smaller, its borders turning red on tactical holomaps as Thanos carves his path toward Terra. The Orks swell in number, fed by endless victory. Every conquered world becomes a breeding pit. Every destroyed fleet becomes scrap for more ships. Their numbers grow so massive that Imperial tacticians begin using new terms: continent class, moon class, planet killer class hordes. In some regions, the Ork presence becomes so dense that sunlight no longer reaches the surface. Entire planets suffocate beneath the living green tide. And at the front of this apocalypse, Thanos stands, a towering brute, radiating impossible, terrifying purpose. The Imperium makes its final stand across the solar approaches. Battle fleets ignite the void with desperate volleys. Titan legions march across scorched moons. Adeptus Custodes hold golden watchposts with unbreakable resolve. But even they feel the tremor, an unspoken dread that this enemy is unlike any WAAAGH before it. Reports claim Thanos has fused Ork technology with scraps of Xenos relics, creating impossible abominations. Gravity-distorting cruiser hulks, shielded gargants, and Ork war bosses resurrected through twisted mockeries of necromancy. The final fortress world guarding the throne shook under a bombardment so violent the mountains themselves wept molten stone. Ork meteors smashed into the crust like green comets, sending shockwaves that turned cities into dust clouds. Defensive lines flickered and died. Vox channels filled with static, screams, and bursts of corrupted Ork laughter. Amid this chaos, the walls of the last bastion, black adamantium carved with ancient sigils, stood trembling but unbroken. Every second felt borrowed, every breath stolen from the jaws of annihilation. Space Marines fought atop the battlements with unrelenting ferocity, their bolters roaring like chained gods. They cleaved through mobs of boys, even as waves of Ork bodies piled so high they formed living ramps. Marines who fell did not fall quietly. They fought until limbs were torn off, until helmets cracked open, until their dying breaths carried curses aimed at the greenskins. Their blood drenched the stone, thick and dark, turning the walls into a cathedral of slaughter. Still, they refused to yield. Sisters of battle wreathed themselves in holy fire, hurling themselves into the enemy lines even as flames ate their armor and flesh. Chanting hymns through blistered throats, they fired meltaguns until the barrels dripped metal. Their martyrdom illuminated the battlefield in burning arcs of devotion, showing the Imperium's last spark of defiance. Orks laughed as they burned, yet even the Xenos hesitated at the sight of these burning angels refusing to die quietly. It was beauty twisted into horror, faith sharpened into a weapon. Above, the void became a graveyard. The Imperial Navy threw its last ships into desperate ramming courses. Battlecruisers with ruptured hulls plunged into Ork rocks like falling suns, detonating in nuclear blossoms that swallowed fleets whole. Pilots whispered final prayers before locking their trajectories. Some ships carried thousands of souls, every one of them choosing oblivion over surrender. The sky rained steel, fire, and shattered hope. The final wall held, but it bled from every direction. This was not a defense. It was a funeral procession with bolters. Thanos entered the battlefield like a living apocalypse. His footsteps cracked stone, each impact shaking dust from the fortress walls. Orks followed him in a tidal surge, worshipping him with guttural roars. He wore the WAAAGH gauntlet like a crown of madness, its power distorting the air around him with violent green lightning. Every time he swung his titanic fists, reality rippled as though gravity itself feared him. His eyes burned with purpose, cold, merciless, utterly focused on Terra. A squad of custodians, warriors who had guarded the Emperor for 10,000 years, charged him with golden blades. Their speed blurred, their strikes divine. Yet Thanos met them without hesitation. His gauntlet flared, ripping a hole in the air that swallowed one custodian whole. Another had his spine crushed in a single backhand blow. A third was torn in half as Thanos seized him mid-leap. Their blood soaked the ground in gleaming arcs. For the first time in millennia, custodians died not in sacrifice, but in failure. Dreadnoughts lumbered forth, ancient heroes entombed in metal sarcophagi. Their assault cannons roared, their fists hammered into Thanos' armor. He endured every strike with monstrous delight. Then, with terrifying ease, he grappled a dreadnought's arm, twisted, and tore the entire chassis apart, like a child ripping open a toy. The pilot screamed as the machine was split, exposing the withered warrior within. Thanos crushed him beneath his heel, without even looking. Another dreadnought charged. Thanos lifted it and smashed it into the earth until silence followed. With every kill, the WAAAGH gauntlet pulsed brighter, tearing open rifts of green-tinted madness. Through them, echoes of dead orcs crawled back into existence, hollering for more blood. Thanos was no longer a warlord. He was extinction made flesh. The survivor squads stood in the shadow of collapsing battlements, frozen as they watched legends die. The young guardsman clutched his brother's tag so tightly they cut into his skin. He had dreamed of seeing Space Marines fight. He had imagined them as invincible gods. Now he watched them torn apart like paper dolls. Their armor split, their blood painting the stones red. The illusion of immortality shattered in his mind, replaced with a suffocating truth. They were all mortal, and death had finally come for them. The veteran sergeant's breath shook. His scars pulsed with phantom pain as old battles surged back. He knew defeat, had tasted it many times, but never like this. Not with custodians dying, not with titans falling. His hands quivered uncontrollably as he tried to reload, rounds slipping between trembling fingers. He whispered broken prayers, half mad, half desperate, promises to dead comrades, apologies to the Emperor, bargains with ghosts. Yet none of it mattered. The fortress was cracking. The enemy was unstoppable. The tech priest stared at the battlefield with optic lenses flickering. Data feeds screamed contradictory warnings, cogitators overloaded, and his faith shattered with every impossible sight. A rift opened above the horizon, twisting metal and flesh in its wake. The WAAAGH gauntlet had become a machine god mockery, a blasphemy of pure destructive logic. He could not pray to silence anymore. His Benheric chants stuttered into static. He finally understood the horror. The machine god could not save them. Nothing could. The lone surviving Space Marine watched his chapter's banners crumble in the toxic wind. He had survived centuries of war, but never had he witnessed the Imperium so close to the edge. His gauntlets tightened around his sword until metal groaned. He refused to fall into despair, but even his gene-forged resolve began to fracture. He saw Thanos advancing, reality distorting around him, and for the first time since his creation, he felt something close to fear. Just as Thanos raised the WAAAGH gauntlet to deliver the final blow, the battlefield went suddenly cold. The flames flickered and dimmed, casting long shadows across broken stone and twisted steel. Even the orcs paused mid-roar, their grotesque laughter caught in throats as a shiver passed through the ground. Smoke hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, yet strangely silent. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. For the first time in hours, the soldiers of the Imperium sensed a pause in the unrelenting tide of horror. Something older, colder, and far deadlier than the mad titan was approaching. Lights along the fortress walls blinked, flickering as though struggling to survive. Vox channels went dead. Astropaths' minds shivered violently, unable to decipher the presence that had arrived. Stars themselves seemed to fall silent, as if the universe recoiled in respect or fear. Even Thanos noticed. He froze, his gauntlets green lightning faltering, a sense of dread unfamiliar clawing at him. The orcs around him hissed and glanced skyward. Unease spreading through the horde like a fever. Something unimaginable had arrived to challenge the very embodiment of their madness. Across the scarred plains, the survivor squad felt the change immediately. The young guardsman's knees went weak, the sergeant's hands ceased trembling, the tech priest's augmetics hummed unnaturally. Even the lone space marine's breath slowed, his instincts screaming that a force beyond comprehension had entered the war. Silence pressed down like a physical weight, and in that moment, all mortal fear and all hope coexisted. The calm before a storm no human had the right words to describe. This was the Emperor's hidden hand, moving, unseen, precise and deadly. The battlefield, which had only known fire, blood, and green madness, now awaited judgment in utter silence. From the shadows of shattered spires, black-armored warriors emerged, cloaked, faceless and perfect. They moved with surgical silence across the battlefield. Weapons long forbidden since the age of strife glimmered faintly with psychic resonance, humming with the Emperor's wrath. Each step they took fell precisely, every motion rehearsed over centuries of secrecy. The orcs shivered, instinctively sensing the predator that none of them could understand. These were the Emperor's hidden blade, summoned once every 1,000 years, incarnate judgment made flesh. With terrifying precision, they cut through the orc lines. Boys, knobs, and even the largest war bosses were shredded like paper. No battle cry, no hesitation, just execution. Weapons flared with psychic light, axes splitting armor with surgical accuracy. Bolters firing rounds that seemed to find the exact spot needed to kill. Orcs didn't fight. They dissolved. Their bodies and minds could not comprehend the sudden, cold perfection of these assassins. Space Marines and Guardsmen watched in awe, some too stunned to move, as the horde that had crushed thousands fell like shadows under a sunless sky. Even Thanos noticed the change immediately. He swung his gauntlet, sending entire squads of orcs flying, but the elite force did not falter. Their strikes were preternatural, their timing flawless. The green WAAAGH energy faltered, chaotic whispers weakening. Orcs around him froze, snarling at threats they could not even see. Thanos' expression shifted slightly, amusement replaced by the first hint of caution. The battlefield was no longer his domain. It was now a hunting ground where he, the predator, faced a superior force, one that operated with a cold, remorseless logic beyond orc comprehension. The Emperor's secret force moved like shadows, devouring light itself, leaving the battlefield scarred but purged. The first glimmers of hope piercing the thick, oppressive darkness. The elite warriors surrounded Thanos, their presence absolute and unyielding. The WAAAGH gauntlet, once a symbol of unstoppable destruction, was ripped from his hand in a coordinated strike. Reality itself seemed to shudder as it left him vulnerable. Thanos roared, a deafening final WAAAGH that shook mountains and rattled souls. He struck outward in blind fury, but the warriors anticipated every move. Their weapons glowed with the psychic echo of the Emperor, slicing through armor and flesh alike. Time seemed to slow, the air thick with energy and dread, as the inevitable end approached. They struck again and again, a relentless ballet of death. Thanos stumbled, massive fists smashing terrain around him in a futile attempt to survive. Bolts imbued with the Emperor's essence tore through his defenses. Each strike unmade him further. Muscle, bone, armor, and essence shredded in unholy synchronicity. The WAAAGH energy that had grown with him quivered and faltered. Orks screamed in disbelief, their unified madness fracturing as their mad titan boss finally faltered under the weight of true divine power. Finally, Thanos fell, sprawling across the blood-soaked battlefield. He did not beg, did not yield. His roar of defiance echoed one last time across the war-torn plains, a warped WAAAGH that refused to end. Yet the Emperor's secret force held firm, unmoved by his final fury. The mad Titan's lifeblood seeped into the soil, a green-tinged testament to the chaos that had almost destroyed the galaxy. His death shattered the WAAAGH itself. Psychic energy recoiled like a struck beast, leaving Orks disoriented and terrified. The battlefield was silent, save for the distant whispered cries of survivors, the dying echoes of war, and the slow, inevitable reclaiming of the Imperium. The WAAAGH energy collapsed violently, as though a tidal wave of psychic madness had been drained. Orks panicked, scattering in confusion, no longer held together by the singular will of Thanos. War bosses screamed at boys, knobs argued incoherently, and massive gargants toppled over in their frenzy. The battlefield, once an unstoppable green tide, fragmented into chaos. Imperial forces seized the moment. Space Marines, Guardsmen, and Sisters of Battle surged forward with renewed fury, their bolters tearing through disorganized mobs, every strike amplified by desperation and the taste of vengeance. The countercharge was merciless. Every surviving Ork was hunted down. Titans stomped through shattered horde lines, dropping their massive fists into the ground with brutal precision. Artillery pummeled fleeing mobs, carving rivers of green death into the soil. The psychic residue of Thanos' presence lingered like a toxic fog, but it no longer guided the Orks. Ships that had been immobilized by fear and chaos now rammed through remaining rocks, turning the skies into fireworks of metal and flame. Within hours, the WAAAGH had been decimated. The survivor squad stood among ruins that had once been entire cities. Smoke rose from burning fortresses. Shattered weapons littered the ground. The young guardsman clutched his brother's dog tags, his face streaked with ash and tears. The veteran sergeant sat against a collapsed wall, shaking, bloodied, yet alive. The tech priest's augmetics sputtered sparks, his faith fractured but unextinguished. The Space Marine looked over the horizon, pauldron scorched, helmet cracked. A lone sentinel in a world barely recognizable. They stared at the distant fires where Thanos had fallen, at the silent bodies of custodians, Space Marines, and countless others who had given their lives to turn the tide. The battle was over, but the cost was unimaginable. The ground was soaked with blood and fire, the air choked with smoke, and the horizon burned with dying light. Each survivor carried a memory of horror, grief, and fleeting hope. Their hearts beat heavily under the weight of all they had seen, all they had survived, all they had lost. Together they whispered into the blood-soaked wind, "The Imperium still stands, but at what cost?" The camera pulls back to reveal a horizon of ruin, smoke, and fire. Silence falls over the battlefield as the war ends, leaving only the shadow of what had almost been lost.